I started with Rio Tinto in 1999 and the copper price was 71, 72 cents. And Rio used to force us to put into our models that price diminishing at a cent a year to infinity. And hence they missed a lot of opportunities. Thankfully, of course, they had Escondida sitting there. And you talk about the supply side. I think that we all sort of hope that the demand side looks after itself, and we're seeing some big numbers out of the pundits and traders and economists and anyone who looks at metals. But the supply side is the challenge. Being on this side of the ledger, we are supply side tragics. I just, you can maybe see where 2 or 3 million tons of copper production is going to come from by the back end of the decade. And of course, you see expansions of Escondida, Chuquicamata. Well, your chart there on Chilean copper production is so very, very telling, because the expansion capacity of those major mines, Los Bronces, for example, owned by Anglo, very, very challenged now. They've gone through pretty much everything they can without, tens of billions of dollars of investment, which will come eventually. But I find it, and as I say, I think you can see where maybe 2 million tons of new production might come from, but that still leaves a 5 to perhaps 7 or 8 million ton per annum supply gap. And people are going to have to pay up. Friedland tells it best. It's the revenge of the miners that's coming. I wouldn't be surprised if we see $20 or $30 per pound copper. People talk about substitution, but I don't think you can fit big aluminium wires in your Tesla, and aluminium will go through the same supply demand factors that the copper is. So I think we're going to have a real sweet spot back end of this decade, extraordinarily high prices. It's the place to be. There'll be great fortunes made in the copper business.
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting how the corporate developments is also telling from a cycle standpoint. I was talking, Chris Ritchie was here talking about basically how the miners should be holding silver in their balance sheet and so forth. And there was more the case of that back in the days, and today this rush towards selling their metal to accumulate cash rather is also telling about about where we are. It takes a bull market until people really change those sort of long-term types of decisions. Even from a dividend perspective or just buybacks. When you have all these mines as such a with incredible projects so cheap and giving you the opportunity to sort of expand your resource, in which most of the majors are facing that challenge today, of finding more ore. It's sort of shocking to see the shareholders continue to not back those decisions to support further M&A and other things. And I think ultimately we're going to go there, and that's really where it unlocks a lot of value and so forth. And so I guess being in a panel like this and also in so involved in this industry, to me is it's a pleasure, but also I think one of the best opportunities I've seen, at least in my career.
Likewise.
Well, what's the next mega copper mine that we see that will come online in the next 5 years? And is there a second one? Is there a third one?
I think a great question. I don't, Kakula, Kamoa, Friedland, Ivanhoe's Congo project, you can see expansions. Yeah, I'm a partner in a private equity firm called EMR Capital. We own a little project called Labambe in Zambia. We sold that to Cobalt, the Bill Gates backed company. They're talking about a major discovery. But what I know about that project is that it's very, very deep and will be one of the world's great water mines. Huge amounts of challenge to expand that project. I can't really see it. There will be expansions come out of some of the bigger projects around the world, but I don't think there's anything slated to come on stream that has that. And of course, Kakula, Kamoa, one of the greatest discoveries of all time, and yet that's going to do 500,000 tons of copper. Well, if the demand projections are right, we only need another 20 of those by the back end of the decade. I simply can't see where they're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the challenge. And so where does the supply come from? I mean, like obviously if the copper price goes to $8, then some of the, consumption will abate. I mean, like some of it will, but still a lot of it is still coming. That's not enough of a price move. I mean, we might need $10 copper to really knock that down. So, where does the supply come from?
Well, I don't think that a consumer's, of course, the copper input into an EV or a data center for that matter, not completely irrelevant, but at the moment, I think in an electric vehicle, there's probably $300 worth of copper. If you triple the price, for argument's sake, it goes to $900. So it adds, $600 to the price of that car. And of course, technology is reducing the cost of building those vehicles as we speak. So I don't think it has a material impact on that front. And the fascinating thing for me is these AI data centers, and they've sort of just come from nowhere. And now we're hearing, Chen says it best that the US is going to be out of electricity and rolling blackouts by the back end of this year. Private enterprise. I was sort of always confused about how are governments going to gear up to replicate our grids? Well, it's not going to be the governments; it's going to be Bill Gates and Microsoft and other guys who are building data centers that build their own power infrastructure for those data centers. That's where it's going to come from. That's where we'll see those demand drivers, they're largely impervious to price increases in the metal.
Yeah, and also, not just in the United States, everywhere. And then data is related to national security. So I'm not sure EU willing to share data with the United States, so they need to build data center over there, and then so on and so forth around the world. So there's so many data center need to be built, and so much power needed for that. And as I said, just the solar, they use solar, they use wind, but solar seems to be the go-to. Microsoft already announced they're going to solar. And then you look at the first solar stock, investor already got it. So this is it's a perfect for setup. Of course, it's not just solar. You need a two source of power, you need a grid and solar, right? And then you need a battery backup anyway. So solar plus battery make a perfect combination for data center, especially AI data center going to build. We need a lot around the world. And then one thing I learned from the last copper bull market, remember copper used to be 70 cents forever, and then suddenly it went to $2, and people say, oh, that's great shorting opportunity. But actually there were some idiots shorting copper at that time, $1.50, $2, and then they got squeezed, and the dollar copper just continued to go up to $3. I see something will happen similar because the demand is so strong. And then people will say, oh, copper too expensive. Let's replace copper with this, And then you find out it's very hard to replace. Copper is a very good conductor. What do you replace with, right? Aluminum. There is some short distance you can use aluminum to replace copper, but aluminum has a problem with oxide aluminum. The conductivity has issues. You need to resolve that. And when you resolve that, you need to use more aluminum. So transmission line is out of question for long distance. Short distance, maybe it's okay. So there could be some replacement. I saw there's a user asking about recycle. They're always going to be recycle. Actually, there could be, it also happened recently, people stealing, the Tesla charging station to get the copper out. But then you need more copper to build a new station. So this they will make some impact, but actually what I found was when the demand came out, the copper price just blow out, and we're just waiting for that moment.
Hey Chen, can I ask a question? What do you think is the ultimate strategy from China in terms of accumulation of copper? We've seen those charts of imports of copper basically in significantly changing relative to the last 5 years or so. What do you think is, tell me maybe the long-term thesis there of copper coming just China alone? What do you think it's their, I don't know, their main strategy with this?
Well, China is also it's a big exporter, right? China's EV export, EV going up like to Brazil a few 100% a year. So as I said, not just EV, now hybrid car also use more copper. So the new general modern car will use more and more copper. And so from China perspective, because they are so close to the user, they look at the order book. I chatted a little bit with Robert before. The reason they start buying in January at $3 something was not their genius. They just look at the order book. The order book for the copper related component just goes through the roof because of AI revolution, because the EV. So they accumulate copper, and also they know the smelter. They look at the smelter, say, oh, they can't get enough ore. Actually, smelter has to pay negative treatment charge. And that's something we never heard of before, right? So they look at those because they're very close to the user, very close to the smelter. They look at, oh, we have a shortage. So it was a speculation from January on. And then they sold some, to their benefit, they sold some during the recent copper run to $5. But again, this is only the first step. As you said from your chart, Tavi, that's great chart. So this is only the first stop.
I know we're talking about copper, but Shen, while you're here, the China expert, what do you make of the fact that China didn't buy gold in May?
Oh, China buy gold is very, very simple. It's just there's a deflation cycle. There's a lot of you cannot get a reasonable interest, right, for ordinary people, and then they cannot convert money out to the US dollar, right? So the next thing is good. Liquid asset is gold. It's just not only buy gold, they also buy silver. So I think just investor got scared, and then the housing market keep going down. Recently, Chinese government tried to intervene, but only a few market actually stabilize. Still other markets still continue to go down. So people worried, right? If you look at I think Tavi, you have a very good chart in your presentation about the M2 in China. So the government print a lot of money, and then the money actually in the person's saving account, and then the saving account, what they are saving, they put in a CD, losing money, negative interest rate, put in the housing market, losing money. So there are some people start putting money into gold. And then it just started. So I think it's a long way to go.
In the presentation by Tavi, he had the cup and handle in the quarterly copper chart, and that one definitely, it's not a perfect cup and handle, but it's good enough. And man, if that does trigger, then copper's going a lot higher. I think the measured move target would be $8 a pound, but yeah, that would be incredible. And actually, I would love to see copper consolidate for a few more months here this summer and trade between $4 and $5, and then have that breakout happen in the fall. That would be really fantastic.
I like it.
That's great. Yeah, I like Craig's $20 copper more, but $8 is a good start.
Yeah, let's get to 8 first.
I'd like it to take a little bit of a pause, or even go back further, because there's other projects that I'd love to buy. They're cheap now, but they'll get cheaper if the price comes back. But it won't be long. I think next year, I think you'll absolutely see $8. But I just can't see where it stops. And people I think I'm a bit mad when I say $20, $30 a pound copper. I remember my mentor and business partner, Owen Hegarty. He built Oxiana from a $6 million company in 1999 to, by the time we merged with Zinifex in 2008, it was a $6 billion company. And he was always out there on the streets screaming from the rooftops, telling people that when copper was 80 cents, that it was going to $4. And people thought he was absolutely insane. And of course, the metal price did go up 6 times, and all the way to about $4.60. I was a little bit shocked, the simple copper price started sort of 6 months ago at about $3.30. You take off one mine, 400,000 tons per annum at Cobre Panama, about 1.7% of global supply, and that almost single-handedly was enough to jump the copper price by nearly 50%. That's only 400,000 tons of production. Imagine when we're short 6 million tons of production. I think you'll see extraordinary things. There'll be a lot of billionaires come out of this next copper boom. It's the best opportunity I've seen for asymmetric returns in the resource space in the last 25 years of doing this.
Do you know what's interesting about all this is that when you look at those calculations of how long it takes to go from a discovery to production, and people throw numbers like 10 to 15 years or so. Those numbers are on the back of history of, call it, last 20 plus, or maybe call it 3 to 4 decades or so, which have been remarkably different than other periods, meaning, we've had extremely low energy cost. We had extremely low labor cost. We've had a world that it's been very globalized compared to other periods. So when I think about 15 years to go from discovery to production, I think it's completely understated. It might take even more in an environment where, let's just say, crude goes to at some point between now and the next 10 years. Would it surprise you if crude is at $300 a barrel? It wouldn't surprise me. I don't think it would surprise anybody here. What if we see labor costs going drastically higher? Would it surprise you if we have a war at some point and even more disruptions when it comes to logistics, making it even more difficult to do all these things? No, it wouldn't surprise me. So this 15-year kind of environment, now, yeah, it's a big question. At what price of copper do we start seeing things start being under development and start seeing supply coming back online? But things that are being discovered today, boy, it's going to take a while for that to be under production. That's a little scary, actually. A scary thought.
Absolutely.
Ken, I want to ask Ken a question. Speaking of permitting timelines, so the state of Arizona is the copper capital of North America. What is a realistic permitting timeline in the state of Arizona for a copper project, Ken?
You know what? That's a very difficult one to answer because obviously there's.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Robert. I appreciate it. Yeah, good setup. No, listen, I think, when you look at, I'll take a step back. When we're building out our portfolio, we tried to make sure that we, look to acquire projects that we thought, let's just simply be able to get a drill permit as the first priority. And so you had to stay outside of some of these, state forests, national forests. Obviously you look at Hudbay, and some of the trials and tribulations that they've had. You look at kind of Rosemont with BHP. I do think there are projects that have taken longer, and it's primarily because of the regulatory bureaucracy that goes along with it. So while, I'd like to, remain bullish and say with us having private lands and shallow near surface mineralization, we should be able to get our project permitted extremely fast. I'll point to Excelsior just up the road from us in Cochise County. They got their mine permit in 2.5 years. So I really do think it goes back to, and there's a lot of companies that do things the right way, but if you start building those early relationships and you start getting stakeholders on side, if there's areas where there's high employment rate and the need for local kind of community taxation, I do think you can move these things along a fair bit quicker. So the average timeline in Arizona is a difficult one because there's a couple of kind of, one-sided examples that are really difficult and others that are very positive. But, I do go back to thinking that whether it's be within North America and some of the points that, Chen and Tavi touched on, from a geopolitics standpoint, global trade, I just don't think we're going to be able to rely on global trade as we move forward. So I do think, domestic supply and being able to develop these resources responsibly is a separator. And it should be able to move some of these projects along. If I touch on, South 32 that bought the Hermosa deposit, You know, they had zinc, and then they proved that their manganese was battery grade, so they were able to enter into the FAST-41 process, which is a piece of legislation that Obama put in place, which was essentially to be able to fast track the regulatory environment. And it was mostly meant for kind of roads and infrastructure. So if we need a bridge or if we need a road, let's not get bogged down with all of this regulatory elements. So South 32, to their credit, was able to utilize this FAST-41 because they had two critical elements, being battery grade manganese and zinc. So they've yet to go through it. So that will be a great test case. And with copper being identified as a critical metal in the state of Arizona as well, you know, that has a lot of the other copper developers, you know, extremely excited. And that should be able to, you know, shorten those timelines, should we be able to do it. But that being said, you try to minimize the regulatory overlap. If you're too close to a border, it can add different elements. If you're in a national forest, the additional regulatory bureaucracy is way too detailed in many ways.
Yeah, we'll
So I
stay
do-
out of the national forests. Just keep
Yeah.
it simple.
Yeah. Well, like I should say, I do think it's extremely important that within both, you know, North America, Canada, and the US, that we're able to advance these projects much quicker than we have in the past. And I do think there is a pathway, and a lot of companies are starting to do things the right way.
There's a question from the audience. I don't know if anybody wants to take it, but I'll throw it out there. So there's a lot of copper mined in Africa. Continent of Africa is a very big place, so there's a lot of copper there. But a lot of the copper goes abroad. It's sent to Asia and what have you. Does the panel think that copper that is mined in Africa should stay in Africa as a social good? You know, obviously to build their power grid. There's a lot of people in Africa that do not have access to the internet.